Today, I'm going to teach you how to master Spa on F124 and go through all of my nuanced details that allow me to extrapolate the maximum performance for myself and the car around this fantastic, historic, amazing track that is prestigious on the Formula 1 calendar. And even before we get into the hot lap, I'm going to be saying that I'm going to be doing a full speed lap after this low speed lap, so you can see all the examples fully used and fully utilized, so you can compare with your own laps at home. With that all being said though, jumping into the low speed explanation, and it starts even before getting out of the final corner. You want to be using as much track as possible even as you open up the final apex of the lap, quite simply to get the car straighter and be back to full power sooner and open up DRS with the maximum speed possible. And the reason for this is that that extra bit of track width opening up the final apex of the lap can gain you about a quarter of a tenth between the start finish line and turn 1 braking point, and quarter of a tenth for free. It's more than worth having than giving it away and maybe losing a position, maybe losing pole position even in your qualifying lap. Turn 1 is really difficult in this year's game. It's really easy to lock the rear axle and end up with pace limiting oversteer as you get closer and closer to the apex. The reason for that is, as you can see, the braking zone is majority in a level platform. There's no elevation change really that much in the braking zone, but as you see, as we get closer and closer to the actual apex of the track, the corner as well, you can see the track actually dips and falls away from you, so you end up with a lot of instability as you go closer and closer to the apex. So you have to brake earlier by a few meters to compensate for that and to allow for the car to be settled, be controlled, and for it to be stable as well, to utilize the maximum grip performance as you get to the exit of turn 1, which is oh so critical, but touching upon that in the near future. Getting into the braking point for turn 1, and unfortunately there's not really a massive braking point to be utilizing into this example. I normally brake between the 100 and the 50 meter board, and that's such a wide and vague marker, but there is no better marker for me anyway than sort of just having that raw feeling going in the braking zone for turn 1. So try to imagine where a 70 meter board is and brake about there, and you can actually adapt your braking style going into turn 1 quite a lot. Because the apex is so slow, you can either do a sort of late apex and cut back if you're too late on the brake pedal. If you're too early on the brake pedal, you can take a bit of a shorter distance around the corner and get the car straighter as possible for the exit. So both options are good, and both options are able to utilize maximum pace performance as well. So keep that in mind. If you brake slightly too late, you can do a switch back and get a good exit onto the straight. Coming out of turn 1 though, you want to be utilizing the exit curbing with just 2 wheels on the red and yellow part of the curbing. Anything more than that, then you can end up having a bit of traction loss and a bit of instability and losing time down this oh so critical full throttle section as we're going into Rabion and a Rouge, and that is quite simply easy and flat, and you just want to minimize the distance, running your right hand tire as close to the grass as possible, rising up over the crest, getting as close to the white line as possible. And there's actually a bit of a trick here. You want to be coming as low as possible here to minimize your distance, opening up DRS board here, and you can see the DRS is now wide open, and as soon as you come out of this curve, you want to be bringing your car all the way to the left hand side of the track. And I say little trick here because it's all nuanced details and nuanced ability to minimize the distance of the track, and putting your car over the left hand side of the track can allow you to have a straighter proximity going into the next apex and the end of sector 1, and every mile an hour, every kilometer per hour going down this straight can be an advantage. So remember that as you get to the DRS board, stay as tight as possible, then slingshot the car out to the outside of the track so you can keep the car straight going down this straight platform into the braking zone at the end of sector 1. Again, you're not really going to have too much of a reference to be using going into this marker board of these corners, so I will be braking about 60 meters. So again, you have to imagine it going into the apex, so imagining about where 60 meters is, and that can be allowing you to be in a good position to get the car slowed down. And you want to be using a little bit of this curving left hand side to open up the track in the braking zone. Through this set of apexes, you do have the choice between 4th and 5th gear. I like to keep the car in 5th gear in qualifying. Quite simply, it allows me to have a bit more stability and control over the car as I'm going over these curbstones that can unsettle the car. So adding a bit of stability with a higher gear and lowering the RPM of the engine can allow me to have a bit more predictable on the traction and the oversteer of the car as well. Key note here is to try and get over these curbings as much as possible and bring your outside tires all the way to the very limit of the track, and this is the fastest way around this corner. To go a little bit more in detail here, the reason for that is quite simply, one, you travel less distance around the apex. Secondly, you end up not having to run your tyre over this curbstone. As you can see, it's unsettling the car quite a little bit as we're going over the curbstone, but when we put our car back on the tarmac on the left hand side of the curbing, it's nice and flat and predictable to be using. So try to get your inside tyre over the curbing where the track is flat, and that'll give you good performance. Into the exit of these corners, again, you're going to be in 5th gear right now, and the exit of that first left-hander is all about setting up the right-hander. So as much as possible as you can get to the left-hand side of the track before going into the right-hander, ever more advantage to you at home. The further you are to the right hand side of the track, the less advantage and less speed you're going to be able to carry around this apex, and as you can see, it's going to compromise you on the exit as it does get pretty tight here, as you only can run 2 tires on this exit curbing. If you run more than 2 tires, then you end up bottoming out the car, and you can see the car isn't even able to turn while doing 60 miles an hour, let alone 110, 120 miles an hour like you would be doing on a qualifying lap exiting that corner. So remember, only 2 tires on the exit curbing, and now coming down into a really treacherous and easy to make a mistake on this downhill understeering right-hander. You're going to be braking just after the curb starts on the left hand side, and a little tip here for you at home is to go down the gearbox really slowly, and only when you see that the dash lights have almost disappeared and you're down into the green segments of the dash, then to pull the downshift. The reason for this is with the lower RPM of the engine, it will allow a bit more stability, and while you're downshifting aggressively, it can kick oversteer into the car. When you are downshifting slower, it makes the downshift a bit more subtle for the car, a bit more predictable. So downshift really slowly going into this corner, as it's really easy to lose the rear axle going in. I like to keep the car in 4th gear and keep the car as tight as you possibly can going around this apex, and then building back onto the throttle, opening up as much of the road as possible on the exit. Up into 5th gear and over to the right hander, again only using 2 wheels on this outside curbing, as if you go further more over the curbing and have the bottom of the car over the curbing, then you're going to end up bottoming out the car and losing any ability to turn, going into a critical left-hander. So like I say, only putting 2 wheels on this outside curbing is the only way to do this apex as fast as possible, so keep that at note as you go around yourself. 5th gear, and you want to be using as much of the track on the inside as possible. It's very difficult to nail here, as if you go slightly too tight, you end up with grass on the tyres, and if you go wide, the apex is so tight and narrow around here that you can easily find yourself on a validation on the exit of the corner. With that being said, use up as much of the road as possible, and a key note about the track limits on Spa, especially turns like this. For some reason on this game, the same as Imola, the track limits are more or less done by like having 2 wheels inside the white line, whereas on F1 23 and previous iterations of the Formula 1 game, it was done by having 1 wheel within the white line. So keep that in mind, and that might be why you're getting validations that seem a bit unpredictable and unreasonable when you're driving around yourself. So always try to keep 2 wheels inside the white line on this year's iteration of Spa and Imola and other tracks as well, and that will keep you from invalidating your laps. In qualifying, Pouon is easily flat out in 7th gear. You want to be in 7th gear here just to keep the RPMs higher on the exit, and then pull the car back over the left hand side of the track to not waste any distance, as traveling any extra distance is just wasting lap time in a racing car. basically. And then going up into Piff Path or the Fangio chicane, it's got very many different names. I like to call it Piff Path though, and ultimately you're going to be braking just before this white line on the track here. So again, no real marker boards going into this corner, but it's going to be really key to have a really good feeling and confidence with the car going into this apex. Much like turn 1 though, if you go slightly wide on the braking, you can actually recover it quite easily going into the apex here, as there are many different lines that you can utilize while going through this corner. You can either go really tight if you've broken slightly early, or if you've broken too late, don't panic, and you can keep the car for a late apex and try to reconnect the racing line going into the exit of the first apex here. And the reason why so many different racing lines work on this corner is you have two corners that are very medium speed following one after another. So if you go too wide on the first apex, don't worry, you can set up the second apex with a better racing line, and if you go too slow on the first apex, then you can be nice and tight and minimize the distance while going around the corner of the track. Making the best of a bad situation is what's really key to these corners here on Spa to maximize your lap time potential. On the exit, once again, easy to be caught out by track limits, but remember, keep two wheels inside the white line at all times and you will be a-okay, but utilize as much of the track on the exit as possible to get as much speed as possible. And going into ending the sector 2 split here, you're going to be braking just after the curb starts on the left hand side, and as much confidence as possible, you want to be using up as much curbing as possible going into the left-hander, quite simply as it will open up the track more and more and more for you as you get onto an oh so critical exit going into sector 3. With the racing line, I like to be going down into 4th gear, and that'll be allowing me to hook the rotation of the car very nicely, and as soon as you feel like you can start bleeding back into maximum throttle and just really gently pushing the car back to its maximum throttle and maximum power potential, you want to be doing that in 4th gear and using up all the road on the exit. You don't really have to worry about track limits on the exit here. It does still apply, so do not, let's say, waste your energy. Do not just turn off mentally and take the track limit by mistake. But quite simply, if you do take a track limit here, you're going to be in the gravel anyway, so you're going to be losing time, so it's not really worth pushing the track limits on this corner as a pure example. On this right hand though, I've seen it catch out quite a few people right now on this year's game, and that is when they go over the right hand curbing here, the car becomes a bit unstable and can spin you even in 5th, 6th, 7th gear. The reason for that is quite simply the curb inside is quite slippery, and it can end up just compressing the left hand side tires of the car, what can spike the surface temperature and then can lead to you having really unpredictable spins. So the best way to utilize that and best way to avoid the situation is quite simply do not touch this inside curbing at all. You don't need to. The corner's easily flat out anyway, maybe not in the rain, but in the dry conditions it's easily flat out. So don't take the inside curbing, don't take the risk, and just try to go through that as smoothly as possible, as now you're heading into the high speed final sector here in Spa and going into Blanchimont. Well, it's just easily flat out. Wet, dry, qualifying race, warm tyre, dirty air, it's easily flat out, and it's just about minimizing your steering wheel resistance going through here, so using up as much of the road on the exit to minimize the drag on the tires, and that allows you to go through this apex as fast as possible. 100 meter board is going to be your braking reference going into a very difficult chicane here, and you want to be bringing your car to the left hand side of the track as much as possible in the braking zone, and then going down into 3rd gear for the first apex. And it's very critical to get your car as much on this inside curbing as possible. So you can see I'm right up against the track limits here, and I'm using up as much of the road, even utilizing the red part of the curbing on the right hand side. And the reason for that is that the first apex is kind of irrelevant in this chicane, and it's all about the exit you can get out of the final corner, because it's so low speed and the rear tires are crying, they're screaming for help after doing a qualifying lap here, because it's 7 kilometers long, so the rear tires are really suffering, especially in a racing situation as well. So it's all about getting the car settled between these two apexes and then letting the rotation happen quite naturally for this final corner. You can go down into second gear if you want a bit more rotation. Just be aware that it can be difficult to manage the wheel spin on the exit, and apart from that, second and or third gear is more than suitable for the exit of this corner. Opening up DRS, and that is how you absolutely nail a hot lap here in Spa. I'm going to show you the setup that I was using as well. So quite simply, this is going to be 15-4, 85, 10, 100, left, 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 left. And then you're going to be running 41, 21, 21, 22, 55, 100, 54 on the brake bias, and the maximum tire pressures. So this setup is very good, to be honest. It's very nice. It's quite fun to drive as well. I quite enjoyed my laps here. If you're looking to do a racing situation, maybe with a tire deg, maybe in the rain as well, bumping up the off-throttle to 30% will help you manage the tires as they start to degrade and might be losing the grip and the confidence of the car as the stint progresses. So definitely putting that rear differential, or the off-throttle differential I should say, up into 35% depending on your confidence, but I would personally advise 30% is a really good balance to have. With everything being said, this has been the hot lap, the guide, and as well with the setup included. So I'm going to jump in and do a full hot lap for you, and hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next video. Grazie ragazzi, ciao ciao, bye bye.